To welcome representatives of the Centre for Cross-Border Studies. It's good to see you again, Ruth. I know we met informally a while back and shortly after you were appointed to your new position, and we appreciate you meeting with us at that time, so we look forward to your presentation today. You're obviously the director of the Centre. Dr. Anthony, I'm going to go for it here, Soares. Not the other name. Soares. No. Am I doing good here, Anthony? Yeah? Okay, Soares. Research and Policy Manager. It's good to see you again, Anthony. Anne-Marie O'Kane. Anne-Marie, you're very welcome. Information Officer and Border People Manager. You're in charge of the Border People website, which has been an invaluable tool for people accessing information on entitlements on a cross-border basis. So that has been quite helpful since we met you last. And Thomas Haverty. Thomas, you're very welcome, Research Assistant. The Centre for Cross-Border Studies is an advocate for cross-border cooperation and a valued source of research, information and support for collaboration across borders on the island of Ireland, Europe and beyond. It is dedicated to contributing to social cohesion, economic development and environmental sustainability through cross-border cooperation on the island of Ireland and beyond. So we look forward to hearing from you on opportunities to further develop North-South cooperation. Before I invite you to make a presentation, I want to advise that you, the witnesses, are protected by absolute privilege in respect of utterances of the committee. However, if you're directed by the committee to cease making remarks on a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter to only a qualified privilege in respect of your remarks. You are directed that only comments, evidence in relation to the subject matter of this meeting are to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you not criticise nor make charges against a member of either House of the Oireachtas, a person outside the Houses, nor an official by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Got all that?
Yep.
Great. So, Ruth, or Dr.
Ms.
Ms. Okay. Or Ruth, we'll work with Ruth. I now call on you to make an opening presentation.
Thank you very much. And thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today on behalf of the Centre for Border Studies. We were established in 1999, specifically in the context of the Good Friday Agreement, with the aim of providing a non-governmental vehicle to support and promote cross-border cooperation. So our submission today is really based on our experience in promoting cross-border cooperation and supporting it, both on this island, but also increasingly more recently in Europe as well. And hopefully you'll have more details about the Centre and also our longer presentation in your pack. So our comments are based on that. And just maybe to start off, it's important to say that we do get core funding from the Irish government through the Department of Education and Skills, and that's an essential element of our own sustainability, and it's very important, we feel, to acknowledge that here, that we are very grateful for it. But our primary income, like so many people recently, has been limited to time-limited project funding from Europe. So just moving on from there, while working with the other cross-border regions has been increasingly important for us, the context of our work has always been, first and foremost, Strand 2 of the agreement. Thus, we are very conscious that we are now 16 years on, and it's 20 years since the ceasefires. We are also very conscious of the fact that only a minority of peace agreements last more than a decade, and in the absence of comprehensive efforts to transcend social divisions, armed conflicts frequently recur. And certainly in recent years we have seen an escalation in what's known as post-conflict violence, in particular sectarian, racist and other hate crimes, but also other types of crimes, antisocial behaviour and crimes within communities. And the residual paramilitary violence also provides a portent of how truly terrible a resurgence in politically motivated conflict will be if the fragile political structures atrophy or break down. The dangers of allowing the agreement to become unravelled, or for some elements to be allowed to wither away, should be clear to all of us. It was reassuring, therefore, that the Taoiseach, in his remarks at the launch of the government's Reconciliation Fund strategy, recognised the corrosive effect that legacy issues continue to have over the daily lives of people on the island, and the responsibilities of both governments towards finding political and societal mechanisms to deal with those legacy issues. Our focus, of course, is on cross-border cooperation, and the Centre works very closely with the North-South Ministerial Council Joint Secretariat, and we recognize that cooperation at that level has been very effectively embedded. We would, of course, like to see cooperation extended and deepened. And in that sense, we are somewhat disappointed that there's been very little visible progress on the review for additional cross-border bodies and areas of cooperation. We think it would certainly help to build greater political endorsement for the bodies if a more proactive approach was taken to ensuring that the benefits of the work of those bodies was better understood by the voting public in both jurisdictions. This could be done through more robust communication strategies, but also we would suggest through commissioning social and economic impact evaluations to provide a firm evidence base to support the case for continued public investment in the North-South bodies. Below that level, however, cross-border cooperation isn't so well embedded. Cross-border cooperation among other public bodies and between public bodies and civil society is still fragmented and weakly institutionalized. And since the economic crisis of 2008, there's to some extent, the austerities has provided a rationale for deprioritization of cross-border cooperation. The potential efficiencies of delivering public services on a cross-border or all-island basis should be starkly obvious to anyone. However, cross-border cooperation requires capacity, skills, and resources. And even more important, it requires leadership and clear and unambiguous direction from policymakers. But since the demise of the Common Chapter, the limited but nevertheless important references to cross-border cooperation have dwindled and all but disappeared from major policy documents. Unless there is a clear policy imperative supported by resources, and it is made clear to civil servants and other public officials that it is part of their job, even the most motivated people will find that cross-border cooperation has become an unaffordable luxury. The European Peace and Interreg programs particularly have made a tremendous contribution to normalizing cross-border cooperation networks among local authorities, public agencies, and community and voluntary organizations. And the peace program in particular, I think, is well recognized as having helped to sustain the peace process at times when the formal structures were stalled or suspended. And perhaps one of the most valuable outcomes of cross-border programs has been the facilitation of the cross-border networks. The requirement built into the programs for partnership working effected real change in the culture for civil society organizations and giving them new access to decision making, and importantly also made a major contribution to encouraging active citizenship. However, the fact remains that cross-border cooperation in Ireland has been highly dependent upon the European programmes Peace and Interreg. The only other significant sources of public funding for cross-border cooperation have been the International Fund for Ireland, EU and American funding, and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Reconciliation Fund. So we do very much welcome the commitment in the new strategy for the Reconciliation Fund to building a strong civil society and the explicit inclusion in the fund's criteria of support to projects that build North-South links. As the strategy states, significant progress since the Good Friday Agreement cannot be taken for granted, and it is essential that cross-border cooperation be mainstreamed within public policy and budget lines on both sides of the border. It is clear from the draft Peace and Interreg programs, the documents out for consultation at the moment, that the focus of the program is increasingly narrower and getting less accessible, not just for the civil society organizations, but also for local government. And we are concerned and very disappointed that there is no specific allocation within the proposed Peace 4 program for cross-border projects. We think that it's essential that a specific portion, and we're recommending 15% as in the Peace 1 and Peace 2 programs, be ring-fenced for cross-border projects. Similarly, there's changes to the plan match funding allocations, and the two governments' allocation will now be reduced to 15% from the previous 25%. Excuse me. With projects now expected to find the other 15% from other sources, which again will be fine for the larger statutory projects. But it's essential that the reduction in the national contribution in the 2014 to 2020 programs does not simply revert into central government funds. Cross-border work has particular challenges and difficulties. It requires new skills and additional resources. So we propose that the two governments establish a new cross-border funding program targeted at civil society, and we would recommend approximately 40 million euros over 7 years would be a reasonable amount. And finally, the Centre published in 2012 a major study on the border region economy. More recently, we commissioned and published additional studies on the theme towards a border development zone. Since then, we have been supporting a border development zone steering committee chaired by Mr. Porrick White, involving cross-border local authority networks, the Border Regional Authority, IBEC, and Intertrade Ireland. The border region continues to be characterised by multiple disadvantages relative to the rest of the island and the rest of the UK, and continues to lag behind the EU average on a number of social and economic indicators. The European Union has introduced a new mechanism, integrated territorial investment, that is specifically intended to address such social and economic disparities and promote territorial cohesion. That is, to bring regions such as the Irish border region closer to the levels of prosperity and development of more affluent regions. So the Centre strongly supports the concept of integrated territorial investment for the border region. Excuse me. This would ensure not only that the smaller dedicated cross-border funds, but also mainstream European regional development funds and European social funds and other mainstream funding programs in both jurisdictions would prioritise the border region. So in conclusion, cross-border work has particular challenges and difficulties. It requires new skills and additional resources. And most importantly, it needs a supportive policy framework. There has not been an overarching and strategic framework to give coherence to the many valuable cross-border initiatives that have been implemented in the past 2 decades. Too often, the European programs have compensated for a lack of leadership and investment, rather than complementing a strategic cross-border intervention. Sustainable peace and development on the island requires new ways of thinking and new ways of doing business, and that means public officials and representatives and the social partners thinking and working beyond their traditional jurisdictions. So we would recommend that there's a need for a new common chapter explicitly incorporating an imperative for cross-border cooperation in public policies and development strategies in both jurisdictions. Excuse me. A new cross-border funding program should be established focused on civil society with a minimum investment of 40 million euros over 7 years. A specific proportion, i.e. 15% of Piece 4, should be ring-fenced for cross-border projects. And finally, an integrated territorial investment strategy for the border region should be developed, targeting the structural funds in both jurisdictions and combined with the European territorial cooperation programs and national government contributions. And we recognize that those recommendations are very ambitious, but we think that that's what is needed to make a real difference in terms of sustaining cross-border cooperation over the next 2 decades. Thank you.
Okay, Ruth, thank you very much. We'll give you a chance to catch your breath there now. We'll take a number of members, starting with Deputy Brendan Smith.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and like you, I want to welcome the group who are presenting today, and thank you very much for your detailed presentation. There's a lot of very, very good material of importance to all of us as public representatives, both North and South, included in your contribution. I just want to take the opportunity as well to compliment your organisation over the years, where you've done exceptionally good research and you've pulled together a lot of issues that strand both sides of the border and that need to be looked at in an all-Ireland context. And that type of material, that type of research had been lacking for over the decades, so it's a very important that your work continues, and indeed your centre has been a catalyst for pulling together strands on different issues that are relevant to all of the island. So your work has been very, very important. I think the tone of your contribution as well strikes a note that we need to be pretty assertive in the need to have much better cross-border cooperation and the development of further all-Ireland bodies in the context of the review of the St Andrews Agreement is very, very important. I had the opportunity to listen to your presentation some time ago here in Leinster House and to listen to your presentation at other conferences as well. And I think you have always made the very valid point that there are areas that stand out really where we need to develop cross-border All-Ireland bodies. The area of further and third level education, the area of the delivery of health services. And I know cooperation is happening on an ad hoc basis in those areas, in those particular areas, but it needs to be pulled together and given that leadership, that status, I believe, in those areas. We need to get the proper architecture around the development of those policies and implementation of the policies as well, not just the development of policies. I think it was the last major programme that had a common chapter was the National Development Plan of 2010 to 2014, but there was a common chapter in that, and a very, very important chapter. And I know there was particular relevance paid to consultation in advance of that chapter being agreed at government. And I think it was very, very disappointing that when an investment programme was launched in Belfast, I suppose it's most of a year ago now, I can't remember. I think Prime Minister Cameron and Mr Robinson and Mr McGuinness would have been the main speakers of that event, that there was no political representation from government here. And I think that was a missed opportunity, and whoever devised that particular mechanism of not continuing the common approach, the common chapter approach, I think they've done a very serious disservice, because we need, you can have the common chapter, I know that, you mightn't get the investment and the progress that we need, but if we don't have certain parameters to work within, then we're going nowhere. And there is so much potential, and so much has been achieved as well. We always want to recognise what has been achieved and what has been achieved on a daily basis between statutory organisations, north and south, be it at semi-state, state level or at department-to-department level as well. But I think your body can continue to highlight the need to harness the potential of All-Ireland development, and the border area in particular needs that particular emphasis, and it needs that particular attention to draw investment, because we know sadly over the years we lost out so much due to the troubles. So we did. Just with regard to Piece 4, and maybe you could update us, you mentioned that won't provide for funding on a cross-border basis for individual programmes. But I'm sure the Chairman will let you in later, maybe with all the questions. That would be disappointing, because I think the idea of the Interreg peace programmes, Interreg and all of them, was a particular emphasis on the border region, plus the cross-border aspect. Because my home parish is borders County Fermanagh, so it does. You know, when I cross over to a football match, whatever, and I chat with some of the locals in Fermanagh, we discuss the same issues as I would discuss at home in my home village in Bombay. So it's farcical to think that projects that will have the cross-border element will not be supported under a programme that should be targeted at those particular areas. Because there has been so much success in those cross-border projects that all of us as public representatives in this room would have supported over the years, and where we see the real benefit in rural and urban communities of that particular investment, and particularly the ownership of the projects by the local community as well. So whatever we can do as a body, I think we should highlight the necessity of an inclusive measure north-south, particularly in regard to Piece 4, where funding is identified, and we want to make sure it reaches the areas that we believe it should be targeted to, and not just that we believe, but areas that need that particular additional investment. Again, sincere thanks for your contribution and the excellent work that is done and has been done over the years by your sector. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Pat Doherty.
Welcome, Ruth, and your colleagues here today. We've just been through the elections in the north to the new super councils, so-called super councils, that have been given increased economic powers than the councils in the south. have been given increased economic development powers. Is there any ability there to create a border development zone that could develop all of that and bring it forward? Because if you look at any of the indicators of unemployment or deprivation, you'll find them at their height outside of big urban centres in the border areas. And I was just wondering about the potential of a border zone, economic zone, given that in 10 months' time the new super councils in the north will be in place. The elections have been held. The powers are being transferred from various departments as we speak. And I'd just like you to speak on that and see if that could be developed.
Okay, Pat, thank you. Anybody else up? Okay, give members time to collect their thoughts. So you want to come in now, Senator Mary White?
Thank you very much, Ms. Talon, for I have met you many years ago in the early 90s in my involvement with the Fianna Fáil women's group, visiting you in Conway Mills. So you have a tremendous legacy and you have a tremendous reputation. So I'm delighted to meet you again. And you're obviously passionate. You're a passionate person. You're obviously committed in your activities to keeping the spirit and realities of cross-border cooperation alive, as in the interests of all our peoples. And I put on the record, I commend you for this. Your review suggests, which I myself know in my heart and soul, a worrying decline and commitment to cross-border cooperation. There's no question about it. You say 2 points: cross-border cooperation among public bodies, apart from existing North-South bodies and between public bodies and civil, is still fragmented and weakly institutionalised. It's very, very worrying. And then on the same issue, the limited but important policy references to cross-border cooperation have dwindled and all but disappeared from major policy documents. So that's a question how this can be changed. And you state that you point out that cross-border cooperation has been highly dependent on EU funding and the IFI. You welcome the new strategy for the Reconciliation Fund and its support for North-South projects. But until we see the scale of the budget, it is difficult to judge its possible impact. And you state that essential that cross-border cooperation be mainstreamed within public policy and budget lines on both sides of the border. And I believe fully our committee should support all of what you're proposing here fully. Are we coming later to the educational paper to Mr. Haverty and Mr. Soares, are we? Are they speaking to us separately?
Yeah, I mean, you can raise that issue now. And
yeah, well, that paper that both of you, Mr. Soares and Mr. Haverty, it's congratulations, most interesting document. And it's a pity the people of Ireland wouldn't even know the figures and the reality of the lack of movement north and south. It's very sad, actually. And I just don't know what we're going to... I mean, it needs some political driver to make this happen. It's complete nonsense, actually. The figures are so poor, and all the people going back and forward over Europe and India and going to Erasmus, and doesn't seem to be... You know, they go off a drop of a hat to anywhere, the young people. And it's equally bad. And the lack of respect then for the mutual qualifications. Like, you'd imagine now that, like, who do you think, I want to come back to Ms. Talon's paper, but who do you think could drive this, or who should drive to change this ridiculous situation? And it's a first-class paper, and thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. It was eye-opening for me. I know about all the other areas where there isn't movement, but that was really an eye-opener, and thanks a million. On your funding, Ms. Talon, it should be, I think it's of great concern, Chairman, to our committee, and it's shocked to learn that there's no specific funding within Piece 4 for cross-border projects. And we should support your proposal that 15% of Piece 4 be ring-fenced for cross-border projects. And and I recommend the work of the Centre in supporting the analysis of the economic challenges of the border region, north and south. and I'm aware of the support you're providing to the Border Development Steering Committee, which is, my husband is honoured to chair, I have to say, because we're both have a deep commitment to working for the peace, consolidating the peace process, and it's seeking to build cooperation for such a number of priority areas such as tourism, borders, roads, etc. We'll be talking about the roads later on. So I just want to thank you. My own feeling is that myself and my colleague Frankie Feehan, we're on a committee to visit the prisoners, both sides, the Loyalists and Republicans, and even there in the prisons, with this sense of that, you know, that the situation in the prisons for Loyalist and Republican prisoners, that there's no awareness that if they don't get their rights, their undeniably human rights, that it will affect the peace on the ground outside. And there's this lack of, we had a meeting, McHugh and myself, we participated in a meeting with Miss Teresa Villiers in the embassy, the British embassy here, and I found her lack of understanding and empathy absolutely astounding. She had no actually empathy for the political situation. In particular, we went on the prisons.
She's not here to defend herself.
Yeah,
so,
well,
I don't know if there is a definitive measurement of.
Well, I mean, I just found. Well, I also put on the record for her, just to finish, that I found the attitude of the British government in the lack of support to Ambassador Haas and Professor O'Sullivan on the Haas report. If that was on the mainland, if that was on British mainland, they'd have
We'll
had
try and keep to the point, you know, just.
If that was in Britain, yeah, I might accept that. That's a
Please correct
slip.
that record.
It's a Freudian slip. My other, no, but the very same.
I think we're venturing into a territory that isn't.
Yeah, let's take this.
All I can say is that the Haas negotiations is that we don't know what went on behind the scenes from both governments. And I think by making those statements, I think it's unfair and it's unhelpful.
Well, I want to formally say, which I did. You weren't at the meeting with Ms. Villiers.
Look, let's.
No, but I have to say, it's very.
Yeah, I know it's important.
I won't hold you up anymore. I wasn't to say. Ambassador Haas is a very frustrated person at this time, and the British government did not put its shoulder to it. If it had been in Lancashire or anywhere else, as my colleague Brendan Smith said, on Britain, they would have been far more active and conscious of not resolving the issues on the ground.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry, you just have to.
Point across. Deputy Ferris and then Michael Kidd.
Okay. Good morning, good Claire. Look, I'd like to thank you for your presentation here this morning. It's been very, very informative and very challenging in many instances as well, particularly for public representatives. I think what's striking is that something we have always known is that the effects that the whole recession has on border regions. In particular, you have employment, unemployment has soared in those areas. And you mentioned in your report about higher average unemployment levels, poorly qualified workforce, low business formation, areas of significant poverty and deprivation, health inequalities, and legacy from the conflict. So they jump out at me when I was reading your presentation here. The legacy issues, in relation to the legacy issues, and maybe just touched by Senator White regarding the Haas talks and how they didn't succeed at that time. Is there a perception or a feeling out there that with the existence of groups, anti-peace post groups or whatever you want to call them, that they are undermining a lot of what the intention of the working groups? Are you satisfied as well regarding from a cross-border perspective from the local authorities on both sides of the border that are working in harmony to try and address the deficits in their area, be it on employment or be it encourage investment, setting up working groups in relation to small and medium-sized businesses and support for small and medium-sized businesses? I think crucially, are both governments doing enough in that regard? and the fact that, you know, like, my party would be critical of the governments regarding they're taking their eye off the ball regarding the legacy issues and trying to address those legacy issues and so forth. And immigration, when you talk about the low quality workforce, would it be fair to say that the more educated workforce are leaving the country because of the economic situation, and that is contributing to the development, both economically and politically, on border regions? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Deputy. Deputy Kitt.
I'll just briefly, could I just join the welcome, and my apologies, I was chairing another session in the Dublin question time. Just two brief issues. One is in relation to funding, and as I said, I missed the presentation, but I was reading what's in the documentation, and there's a reference here to core funding from education and primary source of income, European Union funding. I don't know if you have any figures on that actually, but it's something I'm sure this committee would support if there was an issue of seeing where core funding or where primary source of funding could be actually gained from. And the other issue on education, I think there's a lot of confusion as regards what's available for students. You hear a continuous movement of students from here up to the north or to Great Britain, or maybe not as much the other way, but maybe there should be. But there's not as much information there in terms of what's available, what kind of grants or scholarships are there. And I was wondering if that could be maybe spelled out by your committee, or indeed was there any leaflet or booklet that could be available for students who I think are a little bit confused. Some of the confusion arises over, you know, the amount of points you need in this republic, and indeed the question of the Irish language. Having Irish, particularly for students who do teaching, who may have to go out of the country, or whether it's north or whether it's onto Britain, and then have to maybe do qualification in Irish to teach. So I think it's just a bit complicated, the whole thing, and I'd like to get some detail on that. Thank you.
Senator Moore.
I'll be brief again. Thank you very much for your excellent presentation and the briefing documents. I too I would just like to concur. I must say I was very surprised to hear that there is no funding available for cross-border under the Peace 4, and I think that is something that you know, that we should be looking at. I very much welcome your comments, particularly as, like Brendan Smith, my county kind of very much borders onto the north as well, coming from County Louth, and I'm well aware of kind of the economic you know, difficulties, particularly in an area like Dundalk. I think the Gateway you know, showed we are very much at the bottom, gateway town. And the work that is needed on that. Just from an education point of view, what I wanted to ask again, I think it goes back, following on from Deputy Kitt, it very much goes on to the qualifications and the assessments for moving north and south. I mean, I think, you know, we all know that, you know, the maximum number of, if you like, southern points that you can get with an A level is 350, or, you know, around. So there's the whole problem of qualifications and what courses you're eligible for. I would just ask about, you know, I know DKIT in Dundalk is an excellent college that has really blossomed over the number of years, but they have more Chinese students studying there than they do students from the north of Ireland. So, you know, I think that there is huge work to be done there, or if you could advise on, you know, what more we can do to kind of publicise the fact that DKIT is there. You know, because I know it kind of can work the other way, is the information just doesn't seem to be getting north of the border of, you know, the opportunities that are kind of so close on their doorstep. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Senator. Deputy Keehan.
Thanks. My apologies that I missed your presentation. I was watching on my monitor in the office. I had a meeting, but the work you've done has been very significant over the years, and it's work that sometimes people don't see. You know, you can start a project now and in 10, 15 years it comes to fruition. Just, I have to concur with a lot of my colleagues. I think we've absolutely failed in the education front. We've got I think it's 1% of people from Northern Ireland coming to the colleges down in the south. And, you know, there's so many opportunities there, and we've so much, I suppose, space, and it's something, it's not your problem, but it is an issue, I think, that with a cross-border cooperation, that we could work a lot harder. Just look for your views on that. And secondly, we're doing a study, or we're doing a report on cross-border smuggling. And, you know, if we're talking about cross-border cooperation, it is an issue that has to be addressed. And it's worrying that nearly 25% of the fuel, you know, that is laundered in Northern Ireland, and down here, I don't think we fully appreciate the scale of the problem. And when you see, was it 14 million euros worth of cigarettes in Drogheda, it's something that I don't know, it has to be tackled, and I'm just wondering what your views are. Or is it one of these things that, let's say, that's not been tackled, or how do we combat that?
Thanks, Deputy Feehan. Now, I know there's a few members here that have got into different areas, but if there's areas that maybe you specifically want to respond to, you can do that. And also if there's areas where you want to just present for the purpose of public record, if you want to get on the record here today. So we're not going to open it up to the members again because time doesn't permit. So if we're going to leave the final word with yourselves in whatever way you want to do a synopsis or response.
Speak about the education, then I'll come back on piece 4 because I think that needs clarity.
First of all, in terms of information for students for third level education, the Department of Employment and Learning Cross-Border Working Group is actually looking at providing that type of information to students on both sides of the border. I think we do have to recognise, though, that especially in terms of higher education institutions, that it is a marketplace and that universities do tend to look in terms of their enrolments of students in terms of what markets they want to attract. So perhaps there is some work there to be done to underline the need for high quality, highly skilled graduates to be staying within the island of Ireland in order to address some of the economic issues that we have, is particularly within the border region. There could also be, in terms of qualifications, I must highlight that alternative qualifications, for example, there has been work done on them. For example, the Northwest Regional College has worked with colleges on the other side of the border, and they work well within themselves. And I've spoken recently to the Chief Executive of the Northwest Regional College, and he has many students from County Donegal, and he says they are excellent students, and he welcomes the fact that there are many students from County Donegal within the Northwest Regional College. There have been some questions raised at perhaps a political level in terms of budgetary pressures, in terms of student flows to the Northwest Regional College and other colleges within Northern Ireland, students particularly from County Donegal, that there is some suggestion there's some budgetary pressures that arise from that, and that perhaps the departments have to work together in order to address what is sometimes perceived as budgetary pressures placed on the colleges. But I must emphasize that the colleges themselves say it's absolutely not a problem to them, and they welcome those students, and they want those student flows to continue. There is work done, for example, in terms of offering joint courses on a north-south basis, particularly at master's and PhD levels, where universities are cooperating, offering joint postgraduate courses between universities north and south. But perhaps there is room there for that type of work to be done at undergraduate level as well, where, for example, in terms of the student movement, particularly under the Erasmus program, where students see that as an opportunity to leave the island, to go to other universities abroad. Perhaps there's some room there to develop an Erasmus scheme, or to use the existing Erasmus scheme to promote more north-south student flows at undergraduate level. I'd like to leave it at that for the moment.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
Right, I think it's important to clarify in terms of Piece 4. There is possibilities for cross-border projects to apply to Piece 4, at least in terms of the consultation document. But in Piece 1, the Commission itself directed that 15% had to be ring-fenced for cross-border working. In Piece 2, again, there were specific cross-border measures which accounted for 15%. In Piece 3, it was said to be mainstreamed, and we haven't been able to ascertain what actual percentage went to cross-border projects. But in the Piece 4 consultation document, what has us very concerned is that although cross-border projects are mentioned, because there is a derogation which has always been there for the Peace Programme, that single jurisdiction projects could be funded under, like, for instance, Interreg, which has to be cross-border. The Peace Programme has always allowed for single jurisdiction projects, but now there's so little emphasis on cross-border projects in the documents itself. We would be very concerned that, you know, those aren't being given maybe the space, and they would be in direct competition with every other peace project. And given especially the pressure on civil society organizations, that peace now constitutes one of the few areas of potential funding for civil society programs and projects, that in fact it will be very difficult, you know, cross-border could get even more squeezed out. So that's why we're emphasizing that we think, again, go back to the 15% and ring fence it for cross-border. It is a European territorial cooperation program, so it should be cross-border, and it should have more of a cross-border focus than it appears to be going to have. And just finally, in terms of the border development zone, there is still work going on. We work very closely with the cross-border local authority clusters. Unfortunately, all the local government reform on both sides of the border over the past year or two has really taken up everybody's energy and focus. So it has been quite difficult, but now that's getting maybe a bit more settled in. But certainly there is quite a lot of support within the cross-border clusters of local authorities for the border development zone idea. They're working on a charter which hopefully will go to the councils this autumn for endorsement, and that will be kind of a charter which will summarize the principles of the cross-border development corridor idea, and then people can start advocating it as we have been doing, sort of as broadly as possible in different areas to try and get both, again, the policy and the resources focused on the border region, because we think, you know, the border region is an entity in itself. It has characteristics on both sides of the border that are very similar, that make it distinct from the rest of the island, and so it does need a concentration there of interest and support and resources. So we think, you know, the cross-border development zone idea will percolate over the next few years, we hope, and we think, you know, certainly I would think, you know, it's maybe in 10 years or so it could be a Euro region, something like that, but in the meantime it's an idea, and we're talking about the border development zone not just as some sort of special economic zone, but a holistic approach to the development of the region. So maybe I'll leave it there, and thank you very much.
Okay, Ruth. Yes, Andy?
Could I just add, in terms of Piece 4, just to give you an idea, in terms of the civic society theme, that out of the 9 indicators that are given for that particular theme, only one of them makes reference to cross-border cooperation. So 1 out of 9 indicators referring to cross-border cooperation. And we are recommending, in terms of our response to the consultation, as one of a number of recommendations, is to make reference to the recently released reconciliation strategy released by the Irish government, because the main policy document that's referred to throughout the draft Piece 4 programme is the TBOC strategy in Northern Ireland. So that kind of creates an idea that the solution to the Northern Ireland is just within Northern Ireland and doesn't allow doesn't encourage that north-south outlook. So we're strongly encouraged that reconciliation strategy is included within the Piece 4 programme.
Okay. Members?
I asked, and do you have any views on the cross-border smuggling? I'm sure you should have a view, or do you have any views, or is it helpful to?
What are you asking? For it or against it?
No, I'm asking for your views as a cross-border.
I think I would put that in the context, even though not necessarily violence as such, but certainly is to a certain extent a legacy issue as well, along with a lot of other things that, we're not unique. It's what we call post-conflict violence is something that happens everywhere. And that's probably, and some of the criminality that goes on now, I think is a legacy issue. And the way some of that will get addressed will be by holistic, we're not experts in justice at all, but certainly in terms of addressing some of the other social and economic things that support that kind of activity. So you could catch it in the criminality, that if a lot of these things aren't dealt with, we could see a real deterioration of the social fabric. I think some of that's already happening, certainly in the urban areas. We can see it in the north and some of the estates around the border region as well. So I would put it in that. We don't have a solution for the smuggling, except that possibly you could just give a tax rebate on the fuel, and then you wouldn't have to have different kinds of fuel.
There's a vote also, Chairman.
The concept of the border development zone, is that on the radar of the North-South Ministerial Council? And if it isn't, is there anything we as a committee can do to put it on their radar?
Well, certainly the North-South Ministerial Council Secretariat would be well aware of it. The more support it can get, the better. And certainly the Border Development Zone Steering Committee, as I say, will be taking it. They want to take the charter first through the local authorities and try and get endorsement there. But we would certainly be delighted to see it sort of get a much higher profile and get looked at. And we're pushing the territorial investment strategy as a way that actually could be addressed by the two governments, as opposed to leaving it to the local authorities to push.
Good if this committee wrote to the Taoiseach and put it on his agenda.
We'd be delighted to see it.
Okay, Pat. Yeah, well, on that, I was going to add. Look, thank you very much, and our timing is spot on today because we have a vote in the Dáil. Look, there's a series of recommendations you have here. What we'll do, we'll forward them to the Taoiseach at present now, but whether that will change in a couple of weeks' time. But whoever will be in the position of responsibility with regard to north-south responsibility will pass it on to that minister, and for evaluation. But I think it's also important to note the work you're doing. It's not just today or yesterday. You've been at this work. You've been at it for quite a while. A lot of the preparatory work for the prior to institutional setup, and we haven't an institutional setup at the minute. We have a North-South Interparliamentary Association. The issues Anthony raised around education. At the next plenary, education is going to be on the agenda. Now, I know it's not in public session, but at the same time, maybe we should, have more information coming out of those meetings. I know the report from those meetings goes to the First and Deputy First Minister and to the Taoiseach. But maybe for groups like yourselves, maybe we can be working closer with these particular institutions. North-South Ministerial Council, there's a plenary on the 4th of July. You've already said you have a very close working relationship there. I think then. They get into the nitty-gritty stuff, nuts and bolts. Agriculture Minister Simon Coveney is going to be meeting with Michelle O'Neill. They're going to be talking about animal welfare. They're going to be talking about the issues relevant to farmers, north-south, labelling or whatever. So, look, we'll work closely with you. You have a series of recommendations. We'll pass it on. I think it's important when we talk about the border, everybody still maybe has this mindset of the border on a map. It's a fiscal border that people see. The actual border itself, the physical border, it's, people see it, the perception is more of a fiscal border, and it's changing, it's very fluid, and we have to be conscious of that as well. So thank you very much, and thank you for your time. We will suspend for the next 10 to 15 minutes for a Dáil vote. Thank you. On behalf of the committee, I would like to welcome cross-party, cross-jurisdiction, cross-competency grouping of people today. So on behalf of the committee, we give you a very, very warm welcome to meet with the A5 working group. Daniel McSorley, Chief Executive, Omagh District Council, and Chief Executive, Strabane District Council. Danny, you're very welcome. And I would just like to acknowledge your own role in trying to pull this together and initiating this as well. So Danny, thank you very much for that. Alderman Michael Coyle, Chairman of the North West Cross Border Group. Michael, you're very, very welcome. Anne McNaught, Project Officer of the North West Region Cross Border Group. John McLaughlin, Director of Services for Donegal County Council. John, very welcome. And newly elected Cahirsla, Councillor John Campbell to Donegal County Council. So it's very nice to have the first citizen in Dublin here today. So John, you're very welcome. Eugene Cummins, Chief Executive, Monaghan County Council. So Eugene, you're fairly new in the job. You're very, very, very welcome and wish you well in your new role. Councillor Dan Kelly, Chairman, Strabane District Council. Congratulations on your new elevation to your position of Chairman. Dan, you're very welcome. Councillor Sean Conlon, Monaghan County Council. So to avoid confusion, Deputy Sean Conlon sends his apologies. So
he's not here. We'll get to go at him over this road.
Yeah, well, anyway, he sends his apologies anyway. Obviously, he would like to be here, but can't be here. And Elizabeth Harkin, Public Relations Officer. Presume it's with Omagh, specifically with Omagh. Yeah, and Elizabeth, I'd like to acknowledge your own work and your own role behind the scenes in relation to your day-to-day job as well and day-to-day facilitation of this, so thank you. The regional development in the border areas is vital to ensuring the long-term economic benefits to this island as a whole. So today we're going to discuss in particular the A5 road project and the potential avenues for progressing the project and I suppose keeping it live and keeping it on the minds of the people who are in a position to move it forward. So before I invite you to make a presentation, I want to advise you that you are protected by absolute privilege in respect of utterances. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease making remarks on a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter to only qualified privilege. You are directed that only comments in relation to the subject matter of this meeting are to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you not criticise nor make charges against a member of either House of the Oireachtas, a person outside the House is nor an official by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. So, right, without further ado, John Cahirsla, John Campbell, County Councillor, if you want to proceed with your opening remarks. John.
Thank you, Chair. Just firstly to thank the committee for receiving our delegation and allowing us a chance to outline and I suppose update on the project that we're here to talk about, the N14 A5 N2 route, or as I suppose we call it now, the Dublin to Derry Donegal route. I suppose I'll open by maybe reminding the committee that we met with them in 2012 September, where we outlined again, the delegation at that stage outlined the importance of developing the dual carriageway on the key strategic route from Dublin into the northwest, highlighting again the need to ensure connectivity between the main cities around the country and identified gateways and hubs in the peripheral regions. We're here today, I suppose, to as briefly as possible, Chairman, to reaffirm the need to have the A5 dual carriageway project kept at the top of the agenda in both jurisdictions, and to continue the planning for the implementation of the project in its entirety. I'll briefly reflect, I suppose, on some of the progress over the past 20 years, and again the context of where we see this project fitting within the Good Friday Agreement and other regional strategies. I'll hand over then to my colleague Danny Kelly, Strabane, and he'll go a little further in depth on the A5 route, why we see it as a continued priority, and sum up again with what we're asking of this joint committee. So again, thank you for having us here. I'm still on, I suppose it's page 2, or it's an introduction slide there that you have in front of the handout you have.
Yeah.
Just think this is I suppose if looking broadly at the Good Friday, and there's a bit of this said in the context of the Good Friday Agreement, and I'm aware that I suppose I'm talking to people maybe that are very aware of it. I'm not trying to teach my granny to suck eggs here, but I just want to set that context. You know, we've seen massive achievements in cross-border cooperation and collaborative working over the past 20 years, especially maybe in the areas of health and transport with the airport, tourism and the waterways, third level education, and that. And just moving over to slide 2 on page 3. I suppose the Good Friday Agreement brought a new beginning to Ireland North and South, to the governments, to the communities and individuals. It focused on connecting people and communities and removing barriers to building peace, prosperity and development, and growth, especially in society and communities north and south in that border region. It brought a new beginning to relationships on the island of Ireland, and our expectations for a new beginning for everyone, no matter where they live or where they're located, and that I suppose is especially dear to us in the region that we're talking about. To build new relationships, I suppose we have to remove the blockages to economic and to social progress. And we would identify the delivery of the N14A5-N2 route to the northwest would help to overcome some of the barriers that the Good Friday Agreement would have talked about, and would help us to achieve and facilitate and make easier a range of projects and initiatives such as the Interreg and Peace. We'd feel it'll enhance the results that are achievable under those, and as I said, we believe that this is a key aspect within the areas that we're representing here today. Excuse me. There's a need to build on the goodwill generated by the agreements and to strengthen the links between the communities on both sides of the border, and again to overcome the obstacles of access to each other and to the wider communities or the wider Ireland. It's really about the equality of opportunity. I'm just going over to page 4, slide 3, strategic transportation. I suppose to quote directly from the Good Friday Agreement, it talks about the right to equal opportunity in all social and economic activity, and again directly from the agreement that the strategic transport planning as an identified area for North-South cooperation and for discussion by the British-Irish Council. And again, under that, I suppose the A5 section has been identified, and clearly that in isolation, I suppose, doesn't work in the context of where we are, that we see the N2 and N14 sections, the connectivity into Letterkenny, the connectivity continuing to Dublin has been essential to allow the region to grow and allow, as Danny will go into, to maybe help start to offset the deprivation and unemployment and other aspects that afflict or affect us in that whole northwest region, no matter which side of the border you're on. Again, there's a commitment then within it for policies for sustained economic growth and stability in Northern Ireland and for promoting social inclusion. Transport links were identified as one of the suitable issues for discussion at the British-Irish Council, as outlined in Strand 3 of the Good Friday Agreement. It also recognised, I suppose, the importance of ensuring equality of opportunity and included a commitment to policies for sustained economic growth and stability in Northern Ireland and for promoting social inclusion. The implementation of these policies included a new regional development strategy which would lead to social cohesion in the rural and border areas as well as urban settings. The strategy would commit to making rapid progress in strengthening the physical infrastructure of the region, developing advantages and resources of rural areas and rejuvenating major urban centres. And I think that again is part of the focus of what we've come here to talk about today. Moving on to page 5. I suppose looking at some of the strategic transportation and the regional strategies that are there, we would feel that this project sits well with the regional development strategy, with the national development plan, with the Northwest Gateway initiative, and the St Andrews Agreement. Just the St Andrews Agreement, I suppose, was further committing to ensure that the Executive has the capacity to make long-term capital investments to underpin the economic transformation of Northern Ireland, as well as bringing long-term benefits to the transformation, long-term benefits to the island as a whole. The development of the A5 dual carriageway and the N14 N2 link is essential to, 1, improve connectivity to the northwest, and 2, to create a peace dividend, particularly in areas which suffered from social exclusion, chronic unemployment and deprivation, which the areas that we represent in our respective councils fall into. We'd feel that, again, a failure to honour the commitment risks creating conditions which would have the potential to resurrect feelings of discontentment and disenfranchisement of communities. If you just bear with me, sorry a second. The regional or national development plan 2007-2013 recognised Letterkenny Derry as a gateway as critical to the economic and tourist development of the northwest, and the government itself is committed to pursuing opportunities to underpin development of this gateway, highlighting improvements in road links to the region among the priorities. I think it ties in, especially in the tourism element, to the likes of the Wild Atlantic Way, the North Antrim coast, and the drives that are there, and linking those, allowing you maybe to hop on, hop off those, whether it's entering at the M1, travelling along to be able to come back, or entering to travel Donegal and along the west coast. I think it would help enhance those opportunities. Again, the regional development strategy recognises the need for balanced regional development in order to achieve social cohesion and build a strong regional economy. And the strategy, I suppose, specifically identifies Oman and Strabane as hubs, centres of employment and services for the surrounding rural communities. And again, I think a major part of that is having a strategic road network, having the project that we're talking about brought to fruition. I suppose the last slide, and just really to put it into context, I think, I suppose we'd hope to have it up on the screens. I think visually it really shows what we're talking about here. If I just look at, I suppose, quickly the key in the map, you can see the shaded area there shows where we're not serviced in this country as a whole by motorways. The blue lines, again, are the existing motorways and high-level dual carriageways, and the red dashed line shows the proposed route that we're talking about. Again, the shaded area, you can see the west-northwest of the country is the absence of those access routes is it's plain to be seen. It's very visible there. We would feel that the route into the northwest is especially important in opening up different economic tourism opportunities. I suppose I'll not hold you too much longer, and I'll pass over to Councillor Dan Kelly now to continue.
Okay, John, thank you. Dan, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I want to kind of just set the scene in relation to where we were the last time we met the committee, and I thank you for the opportunity to address you again today. As you're very much aware, the A5 forms part of that strategic road network between Derry, Donegal and Dublin. It's one of the main arteries also within the Northern Ireland economy, linking towns, cities, air and seaports, and its development would help boost industry and commerce, as well as facilitating tourist travel. However, whilst an A road in name, it remains a single carriageway, unfit for purpose and operating at significantly beyond capacity. The A5 Western Transport Corridor project aims to develop 86 kilometres of dual carriageway from Auchnacloy on the Tyrone-Monaghan border there to new buildings just outside Derry. An agreement was reached between the two governments that the project would be joint funded, with approximately £400 million coming from each. After we met you last time, in 2012, the Minister for Regional Development then went on to issue the direction order and the vesting order for 2 sections of the route, namely the section from New Buildings to north of Strabane and the section from South Roma to Ballygolly. However, in the interim, as you'll be aware, opponents of the A5 dual carriageway project sought a judicial review of the decision to progress with the project, entering 12 challenges. 11 of these challenges were quashed by the judge, but the 12th challenge, relating to appropriate environmental assessments, was upheld. So just taking you on to the slide then of where we are today in terms of that process of dealing with that judgment. The implementation of the A5 project has been delayed while the Department resolves the technical issue raised by the judicial challenge. 4 reports have been developed to assess any impacts in all designated environmentally sensitive sites, of which there are 9 in total in the vicinity of the scheme, and where appropriate to introduce mitigation measures. The reports indicate that with proposed mitigations, the proposed scheme will not have an impact on the functional habitat in the vicinity of the proposed scheme. So it's important to just say that it's not an environmental challenge that has been met, it's a question of procedure around the technicalities. So a public consultation exercise on 3 of these reports commenced on the 30th of April of this year and concluded on the 13th of June. And the Department has received a number of representations, and these are being considered. And the 4th report on the Tully Bog Special Area of Conservation, because of the nature of that study being done over the summer, is still not finished, but it's expected that this will be published for public consultation by the end of the summer. The Department of Regional Development in the North is also reviewing the environmental statement for the full length of the scheme from New Buildings to Auchnacloy, as well as the draft vesting order and the draft direction order. And it's envisaged that the updated environmental statement, together with the draft direction and vesting orders, will be published for comment. The draft direction and vesting orders will be published for comment at the end of this year, and a public exhibition is also likely and should coincide with these publications. The need for any further public inquiry will then be determined following careful consideration of the representations and any level of objection received in response to the public consultations. And then a public inquiry, if deemed necessary, it would seem would take place towards late spring or early summer of next year. It's just taking you on to the next slide. Why the Dublin-Derry-Donegal route is a priority. I hope I'm preaching to the converted. The northwest of Ireland region, with a population of approximately 500,000 people, needs to be connected to the strategic roads network, and that's fundamental. I'm not one to boast, but there's a wealth of latent potential in the region, including its people, business, economy, tourism and culture, which will be brought to fruition given the proper infrastructure. As Councillor Campbell has outlined, the region as a whole is entirely served by single carriageway rural roads, making journey times unpredictable, but predictably slow. Journey time certainty would make the region more attractive to inward investment, dramatically improving economic performance and growth to bring the region into line with the rest of the country. Economic productivity in the northwest lags behind the national average. There is a lower share of high-value economic sectors and a greater dependence on manufacturing and construction sector jobs in the region, which have been badly impacted by the economic downturn. Derry, the North's 2nd largest city and the 4th largest city on the island, is not served by the motorway network link. There is no real link into the northwest except for the single line connection between Derry and Belfast. And as you'll be aware, Chair, the air link between Derry and Dublin has recently been terminated. I don't need to remind the committee of the high levels of deprivation and unemployment that afflict the region. I just want to take you on to slide 10. Northern Ireland statistics for this year show that Derry has the highest and Strabane the 2nd highest claimant rates in Northern Ireland at 8.2% and 7.3% respectively, while the Northern Ireland average is down at 4.7%. Derry and Strabane also suffer from some of the highest unemployment rates in the north, significantly above the 2013 average of 29.5%. Derry at 34.2% is the 2nd highest in Strabane, with a rate of 30.2 is the 5th highest. And across the border, the situation is no different. Donegal has consistently demonstrated some of the highest levels of unemployment. According to the 2011 census, Donegal had an unemployment rate of 26.2%, which is the highest in the country, a position which it has maintained since 2006. The state unemployment figure, I think it's worth noting, is down at 19%. Still too high, but considerably less than the North West. The results of the 2000 census reported in July 2012 also show that Donegal has a youth employment rate of 49%, second only to Limerick. Historically, a deficit in strategic roads investment in the region, it must be addressed in terms of equality for the North West. The A5 route currently operates significantly above capacity for a single carriageway, with daily traffic volumes more appropriate for a dual carriageway. There are currently just under 1,400 junctions, private accesses along the existing A5, with the implications that has for road safety. And I don't need to remind the committee that collision rates on rural two-lane roads more than double the rate for dual carriageways. And we've had a number of significant deaths and collisions on those routes in recent times. In terms of access to services, communities living in the North West have to travel greater distances to key services such as hospitals, life-saving services provided by acute hospitals, and medical centres of excellence. People throughout the North West have to travel significantly longer distance to access these services in Dublin and Belfast, and as you'll be aware, these impact on the golden hour that people need to be treated within. Young people and students have to travel to access educational establishments and training facilities to enable them to compete on an equal basis for employment opportunities. This is exacerbated by the poor roads network and lack of access to public transport. The A5 and its links to the N2 and N14 are essential to ensure connectivity and equality of opportunity for these communities. So to take you on to the next slide, again, why it continues to be a priority in terms of the opportunities, in terms of the costs. The development of a linkage from the North West to the motorway network will undoubtedly have long-term consequences for the region and its communities in terms of improving economic development, the promotion of the tourism industry, the ability to attract foreign direct investment, as well as supporting homegrown Indigenous business and enterprises. Tourism is a major growth industry, particularly in rural areas, and reliable, safe access routes into the North West is vital to ensure the potential of the region is accessed and maximised. The delivery of the Derry, Donegal, Dublin strategic route is vital to maximise the benefit of European funding and to build the prosperity of the region, which will build and consolidate the peace. For example, the A5 scheme detailed appraisal confirms its economic worth, including an estimate of 260 permanent new jobs and 180 million in wider business efficiencies. And indeed, those figures have been superseded by a report in 2013 that was requisitioned by the Business Secretary in London. Progression of this vision for roads infrastructure will greatly boost the construction industry, which is one of the key employment sectors in this island. As well as being a positive boost to the sector, it would also reduce the cost to the government in terms of employment and other social benefits. So I will get into the nub of the question why we're here again today and what we're asking you to do. In essence, we're asking you to become champions for the project. The completion of the A5 dual carriageway is part of the outworking of the Good Friday Agreement, and we're here to ask the Joint Committee to become champions of the project. We want you to advocate for the A5 as a strategic priority with both governments, with the London Government and with the North-South Ministerial Council and British-Irish Council. We would ask you to use your influence, both individually and collectively as a committee, to ensure that the construction of the dual carriageway connection to the North West is government policy in both jurisdictions and that it remains a key strategic priority for your committee going forward. We would ask you to urge the North-South Ministerial Council to use the window of opportunity in the next 12 to 15 months to develop a sound funding and implementation plan for the project in its entirety. And indeed, we would ask you to ensure that the A5 dual carriageway project and the phased development of the N2 and N14 is included in the next comprehensive spending review for the Northern Ireland Executive and in the next capital expenditure programme of the Irish Government, and that the Dublin-Derry-Donegal strategic route is included in any recovery programme being developed. That concludes my case for the defence.
Okay, thank you very much. It was fairly comprehensive, both contributions there. Do you want to open it up to the members now, and then if anybody feels they want to come back in, I think that would be the best way. So we'll start with Deputy Brendan Smith. Pat Doherty.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and like you, Chairman, I welcome the delegation here today and on a very, very important subject. Indeed, you follow on from the very high standard of presentation that was made in 2012 by the local authorities as well. And I think your map where you of the area that's disadvantaged by not having good arterial routes, it's an extremely high part of our population nationally. I remember Seamus Neely the last day gave the particular figure in regard to the population of that particular area, and was very high. And I think it was you, Donegal Cathaoirleach John, mentioned the word connectivity. It's so important for to get economic development and regional economic development, which is so important. I know that Councillor Sean Conlon and our Chief Executive in Monaghan, Councillor Eugene Cummins, along with our council colleagues, are very supportive of this particular project, as I am, as a representative for Cavan Monaghan, and will continue to support the project. It's needed, and it's one that will bring great benefits to a large part of our island, and it's needed, and we need to get it progressed as soon as possible, because we've seen the advantages throughout this country of the major road developments. We've seen it throughout the rest of the island, how important it is. And it goes without saying that I'm very glad to support the project. Deputy McHugh, our chairman, and myself and some other members of the committee had meetings in Donegal and Derry some months ago. And there were meetings in relation to different aspects of economic and social and education and development. And at each of the meetings, the whole A5 issue arose, quite understandably. And at each of those meetings, very, very valid points were made in relation to the need to progress this project. And the economic returns on it would be very, very beneficial for a large part of the country, indeed for the entire economy. Could I just ask one question? My understanding was that substantial funding had been earmarked under the Northern Ireland expenditure programme, and there was some commentary, or I read something, and I may not be up to date on it, but the reallocation of that particular funding to maybe other areas of public expenditure north of the border. Has that position been clarified, or am I incorrect? I know that my colleague Deputy Charlie McConnell, he's gone to another meeting. He just wanted to state that he fully supports, along with Deputy McHugh and Deputy Pringle as well from County Donegal, the obvious need to develop this particular project. But I think your presentation today is very important. You need to keep using every forum available to you, both at official and political level, to keep it very, very much on the agenda, because it's one that we all need to see, and hopefully it can be progressed at an early date. Thank you, Cathaoirleach.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. Pat Doherty.
And I'd like to welcome the two chairs from Donegal and Staban and the rest of the delegation. I think that maybe this is a unique presentation, because everybody in this room, both the committee members and those presenting, are on the one page. We all want this to happen. But just to pick up on some of the points, John was quite correct that the inception of this lay at the agreement in St Andrews, but the mechanism for bringing it forward lies with the North-South Ministerial Council, and that's where the focus of all of our attention needs to be put on by way of the practical implementation. Maybe if I could ask the two Johns from Donegal, the N14, the connection between the A5 just south of Staban and Letterkenny, what current response is there from the Irish government in relation to their commitment to complete that? We are very aware of what's happening on the A5 itself. We know of the court case, we know of the 12 points that were taken in against the A5, and that 11 were thrown out and that 1 was upheld, and we have the new timescale. And I suppose we cannot but go through the various procedures, although I sometimes worry, does it need to be so long between each stage? But nevertheless, that programme has been laid out. And then there's something that sometimes worries me. The section from Ballygolly to Auchnacloy, there's no programme to lay out the draft vesting and direction orders in the north. And they say that's because they are not quite sure where the N2 will make the connection. And if we could have some clarification, maybe the two Monaghan people would know more about that. Where exactly will the N2 meet up with the A5? And because if that isn't properly watched, you could end up with another road in the north linking Derry to Belfast via Ballygolly, with that section between Ballygolly and Auchnacloy not properly focused on.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Deputy Pringle. Come here to the committee.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not formally a member of the committee, I think, for the next hour or so. But I'm glad to be here today just to support the deputation from the North West. And if I might, Chairman, if I may, I would just like to congratulate Councillor Campbell on his election as Cahir at Donegal County Council in the last couple of weeks. But yeah, I just want to say that, you know, I will be a member of this committee from now on, and that as well. And I think that there's no doubt that the chairman and the committee have supported the project as much as they possibly can, and that will continue. And I suppose the one thing is that there is a period now, probably while the environmental impacts have concluded, and that as well, that allows for some intensive lobbying and the new capital programme in the 6 counties, and our own capital programme here to actually lobby to make sure that there's firm commitments there to provide the funding for the project. And there's no doubt, I think it's the case as well made in terms of the need for it, and I mean, it's very stark when you look at the map there, and we in Donegal have always known it, but when you see it there in graphic form, the need for the connections to the Northwest is vital. And I just look forward to working with the committee and to working on behalf of trying to lobby for this project as well, and wish you us all the best with it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Deputy. Deputy Crowe.
Again, just to welcome the group here today. I suppose the project itself has positive potential written all over it. You outlined clearly in your own presentations that the new opportunities, the safety aspect, the jobs, the open up of the area for tourism, the connectivity and so on. So it ticks all the boxes. And I suppose the next thing then is, you know, are you here today to go through the motions, or what are we going to do about it? And your request has been that this committee and others will be champions for change. And I suppose that's the responsibility is put on ourselves. But I suppose to reflect on in the past that I think people did feel let down that, you know, that this was an agreement between 2 governments, that, you know, that whatever, you know, there was financial crisis and so on. But do you believe that, you know, at the moment, you know, is it purely financial blockages, or is there political blockages still there in relation to, you know, people say one thing, but the dead hand in relation to this project is still there? And where is if there is a dead hand, where is it coming from in relation to it? Or is it the idea of, you know, that the money's not there, but it will be, and we'll kick the can up the road? When we talked about this project before, we outlined that there was elements that could move ahead in relation, you know, and both states could, both north and south, there was parts of the project that could be done. You've talked in terms of the elements that, you know, have gone through environmental impact and so on. So, you know, once that's set aside, I suppose the next step is how can we get the 2 governments on board? And there is a commitment from us all that are involved in the British Irish or all those other groups that we'll commit to do that. But the next step is at another level, And I suppose it's you know, the responsibility is on us all as elected representatives are here, that we can do as much as possible in relation to it. So I suppose it's just to give that commitment that we'll raise it wherever forum we can, and hopefully we can push it on. Like as I started off to say, it's positive potential all over this, and we appreciate your professional address here today, and as I say, it ticks all the boxes.
Thanks, Deputy. Senator White.
Mila Margaret, first of all, I would like to congratulate Councillor Campbell on becoming Mayor of that fantastic county of Donegal, and to convey my best wishes to Councillor Ian McGarvey, who at forthcoming 85 year, he was very, coming into 85 years of age, he was a very substantial chairman of Donegal County Council, an example of older people being driving, get rid of this ageism that's endemic, and probably endemic in political life as much as outside. I support totally what Councillor Kelly has said, and I have raised the issue of this A5 road more than any other issue that I've raised on this committee. And I truly believe that you used the right word, to become champions of this road, and champions of the, as you said yourself, of the Dublin to Derry Donegal route. And rather than just doing the numbers, A5 and Emma, the Dublin to Derry Donegal route, and the map shows precisely how negligent we have been. Our government has, and not personally. Deputy McHugh is an excellent chairman of this committee, and I have no personal criticism of him whatsoever, but it's to get the government to engage. No, absolutely not. He's totally committed. I really feel that it's common sense that any potential road that needs a timeline, when every capital project needs a timeline, and our motorways in the south did have timelines subject to planning, construction, etc. So I would like to get a timeline for this. End of story. I'm sick talking about it, actually, to be honest with you. It frustrates me terribly that it's such the whole economic and social development of the route up to the northwest of the country. Like, there seems to be something psychologically amiss in the minds of the two governments, to be honest with you, of why the lack of progress on this road. I could go on and on about it for a week. I just find it a no-brainer. Personally, it's a no-brainer to me that there's a big gap up there in the northwest, in Derry and Letterkenny, on developing the whole economic. Like, we get to, I've said to you before, in this, we can go to Cork in 2 hours. It used to be a day's bloody work to get to Cork. We're zipping around the country on all these fabulous roads that we have here, and this glaring gap up here. I find it pathetic, actually. And the other point, which I've raised here many times, I find it sad, actually, that the issue on the Monaghan County Council have been seeking in vain the princely sum £1.5 million to narrow the chosen route between Clough-Tibbert and Auckland-Cloy from 400 metres to 100 metres as one of the key preliminary steps in preparing for the upgrade. Like, if the money does come, you have to start going for the 400 metre, then it's a bloody farce. Like, it frustrates me. Like, why the hell can't we get this done? £1.5 million to define the road clearly, and not to be wasting time. There seems to be, is it a, I hate to say the word, but is it a public sector lack of drive, like, or lack political drive? What the hell is it that we can't get? You know. That we've raised it so many times in this room, and we've made no progress. Like, somebody needs, and so many other, if the political drive is there, I do believe major changes can take place in society. And I would say that under Chairman McHugh, we should become the champions for his own, dealing with the Taoiseach and all that. You should be a minister of state or a minister. You should fight for that and put the screws on him. But no, seriously, no, I'm serious.
Digressing slightly.
No, I don't care. It has to be said. No, it has to be said. We had our esteemed Minister for Agriculture here who did the vision 2020 for agriculture, and this current government are copying them every step of the way. But what the hell is holding it back? A timeline on it. The 1.5 million. I spoke to the county engineers in Monaghan a year and a half ago. They just want, would you please give us the defined, let us go down, give us the money for the defined route that we can get on with the job. So I think it's very sad. It's a poor show for Ireland Inc., that we haven't made more progress. As a business person, I know how I co-founded a business in Dublin in 1986, which is very, very successful today. And being in the centre of the market was a huge benefit. You know, market access, everything. Like cutting off all the business people up there, between the lack of broadband, which we've been talking already, and the smartphone, iPhone connectivity. Like it's totally, for the border counties, it's totally negligent. Like who the hell, who could we get to drive this? And I champion, this committee to champion is correct, but somebody want to wake up. Because I think it's a national scandal that road isn't going ahead, honestly. That's my honest opinion on it.
Okay, Senator, thank you. I'll ensure that Taoiseach gets a copy of that last contribution.
We'll bring him in and put the screws on. You should use it yourself.
No, sorry. Members, thank you. Look, there's a number of issues coming up there, and maybe amongst yourselves you can decide to pick and...
Excuse me, I have another meeting at 1:15. Apologies.
Sure. Deputy, no problem. You know, issues around the timeline, and maybe we could get a sort of, maybe yourself, Danny, or John, or whoever, maybe just, you know, this... Like, a lot has happened since the end of April, and there's progress. I mean, there's from looking at and reading between the lines, there seems to be momentum, but maybe just for the reassurance of the members that it is going in the right direction.
Chair, I'd like to hear some of the technical questions. There are some political questions which there are a number of people in the back row much more qualified to deal with. I suppose, and maybe I'll start with Deputy Smith's question around money, because it is important just to reflect quickly on the money position. The sections which were planned and would have been planned the last time we were talking, you know, were expected to move ahead the last time we talked to the committee. There was 400 million involved in those two sections on the A5. 350 million come from the Northern Executive and 25 million sterling in 2015 and 25 million sterling in 2016 coming from the government in Dublin. That 400 million clearly is now I suppose not able to be used, and none of it essentially able to be used in practical sense. So it's particularly important that as we move in now to the next round, which ties in totally with your question around timing, in the next funding round, that we get those monies reallocated, and indeed hopefully get some more money allocated as well. But what happened to 350 million in Northern Ireland was it was dispersed onto other roads issues. So theoretically, in the next comprehensive spending round, which starts in the year 15-16, that money will come back onto the table again. That's the theory anyway. I suppose the practical reality is that there'll be a debate around that as well, and we'll be talking to the Northern Executive and the Northern Transport Minister in the next month about that, just about the importance of making sure that he's bidding for that money again next time round. Similarly, it's so important in this side of the border that the 50 million is that we recognise that it won't be practically able to be spent by the end of 2016 in reality. So that money needs to be reallocated as well, together with whatever other monies we could get into the budget for the next funding period in the Republic of Ireland as well. So that's absolutely critical. And in terms of the way we expect the timings to work, is that if the studies are completed, the environmental statement is completed, goes out, and decisions are taken by ministers probably about the middle of next year. So we expect that by middle of June 15, there will be decisions taken in terms of moving forward with the orders. There's a potential for a public inquiry beyond that, so that could be in late 2015. So what you're likely to see is the outcome of that in 16. So we're not expecting any sod to be turned this side of the financial year 16-17. So we see that the 4 years commencing with 16-17 is going to be an important period. And it may be that I suppose what we would advocate is that the view that the allocation for the total project should cover, if at all possible, those 4 years, that the project should be phased over a period, and so that the next funding round is absolutely critical. In terms of timing. Now, obviously, we can't be precise because we're depending on. We don't have the detailed information. The department hasn't completed its work. Ministers haven't taken decisions. So there's lots and lots of unknowns. So what we're talking about is, is not obviously there's no certainty in it, but it's our best guess really at what a time frame of the project might look like. The other question came up around Pat Doherty's question around, again, the technical issues about the Ballygolly-Aughnacloy section. I suppose the positive thing that's happening is that in the environmental work, the environmental statement will cover the cover from new buildings to Aughnacloy. So in fact, the full section has been included. But the outcome of the inspector's report last time round was that there were some questions raised about the connections around Aughnacloy. So there's still more work to be done on that. So I think the safe thing to do is to not get too definitive about how the Aughnacloy aspect is going to be dealt with, but actually to make sure that in fact that it doesn't block the remainder of the project. So environmentally, I think it's going to be cleared this time round, or the expectation will be dealt with this time round. But I think there's still a bit of there's an engineering dimension. Monaghan people are probably much more familiar with the detail of that than I am, but there's an engineering dimension in terms of how the bypass of Aughnacloy is managed in terms of the new project. And I think that probably is practically a sensible approach by the road service to the design. So I think that maybe covers off on some of the technical things, Chairman. Thank you for giving the opportunity.
Thanks. Well, I'm just thinking on the Monaghan perspective as well. I think Sean Crowe was also on about that there.
Yeah, on that, if I may, Chairman, and thanks the words of endorsement from all the elected reps in attendance and the support, indications of support. So maybe 3 years back, well, there had been the route consultation process was very exhaustive, extensive, and there was 3 routes. One was chosen. Now that route currently does go up towards the border. However, there's issues as the Tullybog, somewhere about Aughnacloy anyway. There might be some issues around the Aughnacloy Ballygolly stretch that maybe leaves the last part in Monaghan yet to be definitive. But for the substantive part of the route that's been chosen, you'd say 99%. It has been defined and identified. Now, the problem is, and Senator White touched on it very, very thoroughly, it's 400 metres wide. It's causing a lot of distress for landowners and farm owners and people perhaps a son or a daughter wants to build on family land, that there's 400 metres of land of that entire corridor from Clontibret to the border sterilised for no development of any kind whatsoever, be it agriculture, residential or anything. So what we're making the appeal here, along with what's been previously made around a strategic plan regarding funding over the next number of years, is that there, in the areas of Donegal and Monaghan, that is within, I suppose, outside the constraints of the judicial process that has to be gone through and the requirements around the environment, that in the Monaghan Donegal side, that there is an onus perhaps that it can be fast-tracked and made more sort of shovel-ready, so to speak. And the appeal would be that there is, for I know for the Monaghan side, and we have made representations to Minister Farad Carr on this already, so he's aware of it. It has been on his desk, that there is the sum of perhaps $1.5 million that would allow a more defining down to about 100 metres from 400 to 100, that would leave it at the design phase completed. So again, it's just to leave it shovel ready and alleviate a lot of the pressures and stresses and strains that's causing this 400 metre, almost a half a kilometre wide of a corridor that's sterilised. So.
Okay, Sean, thank you. John, you want to come in? Let John Campbell back on then, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I just might address the question from MP Pat Doherty regarding N14 and where it's at the Letterkenny to Strabane route. And I suppose it, just thinking about 4 or 5 years ago, we actually split that project into 2 portions. The portion close to Strabane and Lifford was split to be a short section to speed it up so it wouldn't be behind the A5 arriving, and we've got through all the statutory processes. But then what happened to the A5 since is now we can't proceed actually with that, while the NRA, who we talked to in Department of Transport, they tell us that will be funded. When the A5 arrives, they see the importance of having the link to Donegal, at least to Lifford, to be set up and done properly, and we'd work jointly with Northern Ireland Road Service to develop that, and that's all ready to go. The bigger project takes us back to Letterkenny, which we'd say is very important and vital, I suppose, for the completion of this Dublin, Derry, Donegal route. It's ready to go as well in terms of routes selected and already. What's holding it back simply is the funding, and we haven't gone through the statutory process yet because that sets in motion buying land and all the costs, but it's ready to go, and it's just simply down to funding for that stretch. People in the area and all the landowners very, very supportive of it. So we've seen for a number of years that's ready to go, and it's simply down to a provision in the budget. That's what I say to that.
Just on, is there a figure? Is there an X amount? Is there a figure?
Yeah, they're from what we call it manor cutting that part all the way through to Lifford Strabane. For the construction is about 100, slightly under 100 million is the estimate.
And are you including the bridge?
Including the bridge, yes,
Okay.
yeah. And then on top of that, there's some added costs. That's that's in the order of magnitude. I would say that it has reduced over the last number of years in terms of the construction prices and land costs and so on. So it's recognised as well as a substantial figure to anyone. It's not that big in the overall context of a capital expenditure programme. I believe it can and should be provided for.
Okay. Yeah,
thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity of coming in. Just to get it back to MP Doherty's and Senator White's issues in relation to the section in Meath. First of all, the absence of this project is severely restricting the development and potential of County Monaghan. And indeed, in particular, Senator White's comments, I can assure you that there's no lack of public sector drive, but what is lacking is, I understand that, but what is missing is the importance and the significance of the project. It seems to have slipped in importance nationally and between the 2 governments. This is a very, very important project that the future of the region and indeed that whole area of the island is being restricted, its development is being restricted. And we really do need in Monaghan to identify funding to progress the design, to keep to follow and to shadow the work that's been done by the road services in terms of what they're doing, advancing the A5 side of it. And we need to follow that and have the design perfected so that the issue that MP Doherty referred to can be addressed in a timely fashion. And indeed, and as Deputy Conlon, as Councillor Conlon has said, we need to be ready when funds become available. And at some stage, the road will have to be built. And not unlike a house or any simple project, you have to have it designed and permission for it before you can, even if you have one, you have to have permission and you have to have it designed. So the early identification of 1.5 million for Monaghan is badly needed to bring us back up to speed with our colleagues in the road services. And can I assure everyone that there's a fantastic working relationship between our colleagues in the north and ourselves, and both sides are totally at one in hoping that, wishing to advance the project because it's very, very urgently required. And thank you, Chairman.
I'd be aware there's a good working relationship between Road Services Northern Ireland and the NRA as well as the local authorities.
Absolutely.
Is there, is the NRDO, Road Services Northern Ireland, sitting around a table deciding on a route, like even what Sean Crowe mentioned? I suppose the question is, where does A5 link up with the N2?
Well,
or is it too early?
Well, that cannot be addressed until the funding is identified and design is perfected. Without perfecting design, that question cannot be answered fully.
Okay. Yeah. The message Loud and clear. Michael?
Chair, thank you very much. As you know, I chair the North West Cross-Border Group, and that consists of 4 councils: Donegal, Strabane, Derry and Limavady. At the moment, we're involved in indirect programmes up to €30 million, and it does restrict what we can do there. Now, I don't know all the technicalities, but I agree with Senator White. We do need that timeline, and I think some of my colleagues here have indicated the sort of progress we would like to see. Could I request that you become more than just champions? You keep the whole project live, because I've seen in the past where projects have been talked about, put aside, brought off the shelf again, talked about again. We need that constant feed into both governments. At the end of the day, the cross-border area has particular problems that you wouldn't have from here to Cork, that you don't have from Derry to Belfast, though there are problems there.
Jurisdiction difference, sterling and euro.
Yeah,
yeah.
and there are relationships between the peoples on both sides of the border, and particularly Derry. Donegal and Derry are very much akin. I'm just afraid that if the pressure isn't kept on, that the North West will end up in the dark ages again. We really do need that pressure kept on. I must say I was very glad this morning whenever I came down. It only took me 3 hours. I can remember 40 years ago when I used to come down as a youth to Dublin, it would have taken me at least 3.5 hours. So some improvement, but there's an awful lot more room for improvement. Chair, I just want to end up saying that the cross-border group does support the work that the A5 group are doing, very much so. We see it as part of our business to enhance the lives of those within our region.
Thanks. Is that Michael? John, do you want back in again?
Yeah, just to sum up brief.
Yeah, go for it.
I suppose maybe to answer, address, firstly, Senator White, I'll bring back your good wishes to Councillor McGarvey. First time ever the chain was handed from one independent councillor to another, sea change in Donegal County Council. And I'll tell you, if Ian McGarvey is a man who definitely defies any definition of ageism, and I always say the anecdote to tell is that if we had a race from the Chamber to Lifford Bridge, I've a feeling I'd put my money on him at 84 years old to beat any of us. I suppose, Deputy Crowe, your question is, there political blockages, or do we believe that there's political blockages or only money? I mean, I look at it, we've Donegal, Derry, Dungannon, South Tyrone, Monaghan, Omagh, Strabane councils. We've ICBAN here with the North West Regional Cross-Border Group. On the ground, there's definitely no political blockage. We're sitting here and we're united on the project. And maybe it's a rhetorical question, because I think it maybe would be better answered by either the MPs or the TDs and senators than ourselves, because I know over the last couple of days of meetings we've had, I don't see the blockage. There's details there, as Eugene, as Danny, as John have outlined. And again, I think the important one that the Senator White raised too again was that of the timeline. I think Danny has again addressed, an indicative timeline, and these other elements I feel have to come into place, and I suppose that's why we're here today. It's the next level up. If there is a political blockage or money blockage or any sort of a blockage, it's not at the local level, and I think that's very important and very clear from the table that you see presenting to you here today. I think from my own point of view, I'm from the southwest, as Deputy Pringle is of the county. It doesn't directly, looking at the map, the Donegal, Killybegs area, you mightn't see a direct benefit to us. But I see the potential benefit. The opening up of any area within our county is going to benefit the whole county. And I know there's a number of other projects, and I think that it leads into and ties into, whether it's into the likes of Enniskillen, whether it's the port and Killybegs, where the Irish government invests significant monies. over the past 10 or 15 years, and are showing now some benefits. So as I said, while it doesn't, for myself personally, I see that it can seem a little far away at times, but I do see as a whole region, you know, as our hub of Letterkenny Derry, it's essential. It's essential for us that this project is progressed. And again, I suppose, like Danny has said, you know, we need the champions here. We need it pushed on from this committee, and we feel that this committee, I suppose, is the best one to leave here and go and make sure that it's pushed on with both administrations, north and south. And I said, I think we've given, I hope we've given you enough of an outline to see that where we would see it progressing over the, you know, the indicative timeline is there, and I hope that through your own good offices you'll ensure that happens.
Okay, John, thank you. Pat, you want anything again there? Second.
Just to say, I mean, I think it's very clear, particularly what John says, that all the councils and all the agencies in the Northwest are very much focused and applying themselves to all of this. I know from my own dialogue with Road Service in the North and the National Roads Authority that they meet regular on the issue. So then that brings you to the question of the finances. The timescale, as Danny McSorley has outlined, is now emerging quite clearly that early 2016 we should be starting to make progress. Now, when the Irish government, through the financial situation, withdrew their funding, they did add a caveat that they were prepared to revisit this in the capital expenditure programme in 2015. Therefore, I think we should make a focus on that. In the North, when the monies were dispersed because they couldn't be spent, there was also a commitment from the executive, and I stress the word the executive, that the money would be ring-fenced when the southern money came on board again. And we need to keep a focus on the North on that. So I suppose politicians on this side, North and South, have a job to do, that both the executive and the Irish government live up to the commitments that they gave publicly. That's our focus, and ally that with the good work being done by all the agencies on the ground. And if we can keep that combination going, then I think we can see this through.
Okay, that's helpful, Pat. Yeah. Are we okay? All right. Okay, members and members of the delegation, I'd like to thank you for that. I mean, this doesn't end today. You know, you've thrown out a few certainly challenges there that lie ahead, and I'd like to, Danny, thank you for talking around the review. And I mean, the capital expenditure review is critical, and you know, even coming from Monaghan County Council and Donegal County Council, you know what you want, you know what you need, and I think the important thing you said, Eugene, is there can be decisions made on foot of a level of investment by the government. So we'll ensure that the contributions here today are going to go onto the right desks, be it Minister Varadkar, and we also can send it on to the Regional Minister in Northern Ireland, and we'll certainly use the opportunity on the 10th of July when this committee will be going to the North-South Ministerial Council in Armagh, and no doubt we'll have the agreement of the committee to have this as one of our priority agendas at that meeting. So we'll continue to keep it live. I think that's been the message here today as well. And you know, the perception, we're working against a perception where people have felt let down in the past, that it was going ahead, it didn't go ahead. Yes, there were financial commitments made, and without making excuses around where the economy was at and the crash and all that, but that's actually what did happen. But we have to keep it going, and I think that's what this meeting's about today. And we have to be conscious of the timeline, the time frame. The Irish government has committed 25 million sterling in 2015, as you outlined, Danny, and 25 million in 2016. And if it, you know, we're hearing today, if it can't be spent in 2015, the commitment is 50 million for 2016, and we have to ensure that. And if there are capacity around, you know, looking at the capital expenditure review and increasing that, we have to keep the pressure on there as well. So, look, thank you very much. It's great to hear Killybegs men advocating road infrastructure up as far as Carrigart and Gartnerbrad, isn't that right, Pat? But I can see where you're coming from in terms of the potential, John. It's a road Dublin, and it's not a number and a letter, as you say. It's not just about the A5 or N2. It's Dublin-Derry, and it's Dublin-Derry-Donegal, and it's about linking into the new Wild Atlantic Way. And anecdotally and physically and visibly, we're seeing more and more camper vans heading up into Mallinhead, down across the bridge from Fannet to Carrigart, down to Slieve League, down to Killybegs. So it's about tying in the bigger picture. And Mount Charles as well, John, exactly. So it's not just about a road from point A to point B. It's about opening up an area, opening up a region. We all know the historical and the traditional reasons, or the historical reasons why it hasn't been opened up. But we've so much to offer, and I think one of your delegation members outlined today in terms of the culture. I think it was Dan, the history and the scenery and the landscape and all that. So I'd like to thank you for coming here today. We'll keep the conversation going, and certainly we'll do whatever we can at our end. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned until Thursday, the 3rd of July.